I remember the first time I met Sarah, and even now, the memory is as vivid as if it happened only yesterday. She had a bright smile that could light up even the darkest of rooms, and kind eyes that made the world feel softer. There was something effortlessly warm about her, an ease with which she carried herself, as though life's troubles were mere ripples on the surface of an otherwise tranquil sea. We were young, unburdened by the weight of time, and filled with dreams that seemed limitless, as though the world existed solely to be explored and conquered by our boundless aspirations. Every day, we would walk through the park, a routine that became as natural as breathing, our conversations flowing seamlessly from one topic to another, our futures, our dreams, the little things that made us laugh until our sides hurt. Sarah loved music in a way that was almost poetic. There was always a song lingering on her lips, a melody playing in the background of her thoughts, and she would hum absent-mindedly, lost in her own rhythm. I, on the other hand, was drawn to stories, books that transported me to places far beyond the reach of my own experiences. I would tell her about the ones that captured my imagination, spinning tales from between the pages, and she would listen with rapt attention, her eyes alight with curiosity. We were happy then, wrapped in the simple joy of companionship, untouched by the complexities that would later weave themselves into our lives. And then there was Tom, my best friend, or at least that's what I believed. We had known each other since childhood, our friendship built on years of shared experiences, of laughter and mischief, of secrets exchanged under the cloak of the night. Tom was always around, his presence a constant thread in the fabric of my life. And back then, I never questioned it. He had a way of making himself indispensable, of weaving himself into the moments that mattered, as if he belonged there, as if he was meant to be part of everything. He was charming, effortlessly so, with a quick wit and a laugh that made people feel like they were in on some private joke. But beneath that charm, there was something else, something I didn't see at the time, an undercurrent of jealousy, quiet but insidious, threading itself through the spaces between us. At first, it was subtle, so subtle that I mistook it for harmless teasing. Little jokes at my expense, casual remarks that seemed innocent enough. "Oh, he forgets everything," Tom would say with a laugh, glancing at Sarah as if letting her in on some unspoken truth. "He's not the best at making decisions, you know." Sarah would smile, sometimes even chuckle, but there was something in her eyes, something contemplative. It didn't bother me at first. After all, Tom was my friend. Why would he say anything with ill intent? I trusted him, and I trusted Sarah. What reason would I have to doubt either of them? The first real sign that something was shifting came on the day we planned to go to the lake. Our favorite place, the one that felt untouched by time, where the world seemed quieter, more forgiving. But when I arrived, expecting to see Sarah waiting with that familiar smile, I found only Tom. He stood there alone, his expression unreadable, and the sight of him without her sent an uneasy shiver down my spine. "Sarah's upset with you," he said, his voice almost too casual, as if the words didn't carry the weight that they did. My heart sank, an immediate sense of dread curling in my stomach. "Why?" I asked, my voice steady despite the sudden anxiety clawing at my insides. Tom shrugged, an infuriatingly indifferent gesture. "She says you don't listen to her." The words hit me like a punch to the chest, knocking the breath from my lungs. I always listened. We talked every day about everything and nothing. How could she think otherwise? I pulled out my phone, fingers trembling slightly as I typed a message to her, but there was no reply. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating, and for the first time, I felt something shift beneath my feet, like the foundation of everything I had known was beginning to crack. The next day, when I finally saw Sarah again, something was different. She was quieter, her usual warmth tempered by an unfamiliar distance, as though an invisible wall had been placed between us overnight. She still smiled, but it was smaller, less certain, as if something unseen weighed on her shoulders. "Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to bridge the growing gap, but she only gave me a small nod, her response vague. "Yeah, just thinking about some things." It wasn't like her. Sarah had always been open, unafraid to speak her mind, but now there was hesitation, a reluctance that I couldn't quite place. The feeling of unease grew with each passing day, with every unanswered message, every moment where she seemed more preoccupied with her phone than with me. I felt something slipping through my fingers, something I couldn't name, and no matter how hard I tried to hold on, the distance only seemed to widen. And through it all, Tom was always there, always watching, still joking, still laughing, still pretending to be the same friend he had always been. But I started to notice the patterns, how he was the first to comfort Sarah when she seemed upset, how every time I tried to fix things, he told me to wait. "Give her space," he would say, with a sympathetic pat on the shoulder. "She needs time." And I, fool that I was, believed him. I thought he was looking out for me, that he wanted to help, that he was being the friend he had always been. But in the quiet corners of my mind, a small voice whispered doubts that I wasn't ready to face. Then, one evening, I saw them together, sitting on a bench in the park, speaking in hushed tones, their heads close, as if sharing something private. Sarah looked upset, her brows furrowed, and Tom leaned in, his expression serious, his voice low. I wanted to go to her, to ask what was wrong, to remind her that I was the one who had always listened. But something stopped me. A hesitation I didn't understand. A creeping fear that if I interrupted, I would see something I wasn't ready to face. So I turned away, convincing myself that it was nothing, that Tom was just being a friend, that there was nothing more to it. But the doubt was there, festering beneath the surface, waiting for the moment it would finally consume me. That night, Sarah sent me a message. "I think we should take a break." My heart dropped, my entire world narrowing to those 6 words. I read them over and over as if the meaning would change, as if there had been some mistake. My hands felt heavy, my mind racing to find an explanation. I wanted to ask why, to fight for what we had, but I felt paralyzed, trapped in the weight of something I didn't yet understand. The next day, Tom looked at me with an expression of practiced sympathy. "I'm sorry, man," he said, shaking his head. "Sarah just needs something different." And in that moment, something inside me shattered. The days that followed felt like walking through a fog, each moment thick with the weight of unanswered questions and unspoken words. I found myself retracing old conversations, replaying moments I had once taken for granted, searching for something, anything, that could explain how everything had unraveled so quickly. I wanted to believe it was just a misunderstanding, that Sarah was only confused, that given time, things would return to the way they had been. But deep down, a gnawing sense of certainty told me the truth was something far worse. It wasn't just time that had come between us, it was Tom, and somehow I had been blind to it all. I tried to push the thought away, tried to tell myself I was just overthinking, that I was letting my emotions distort reality. But no matter how many times I told myself to let it go, the same pattern kept emerging. The little things that had seemed harmless before, now standing out like glaring red flags. The way Tom had always been there, always watching. The way he had a habit of turning conversations in just the right direction, planting small seeds of doubt, making Sarah question things that had once felt certain. It wasn't just one moment or one conversation. It was a slow, deliberate erosion, a whisper in the right ear at the right time, a careful hand guiding her toward conclusions she might never have reached on her own. And the worst part was, I had let it happen. For a while, I told myself not to interfere, to give Sarah the space she had asked for, just like Tom had suggested. But the more I watched, the more the pieces fell into place. Sarah was slipping further away, and Tom was always there to catch her. Every time she looked uncertain, he was ready with the right words. Every time she seemed sad, he was the first one to comfort her. He was positioning himself exactly where he needed to be, making sure he was the one she turned to instead of me. And slowly, I began to realize it had never been about helping. It had never been about being a friend. It had always been about taking my place. The first time I saw them together after Sarah had sent that message, it felt like a punch to the gut. They were at the cafe we used to go to, sitting in the corner, their heads close together, deep in conversation. There was an ease between them, a familiarity that hadn't been there before, and I tried not to think about it. I buried myself in distractions, throwing myself into work, into books, into anything that would keep my mind from circling back to the same painful thoughts. But no matter what I did, the doubt lingered, growing heavier with each passing day. And then, one evening, I saw something that left no room for denial. I had been walking through the park, the place where Sarah and I had spent so many of our best moments, when I saw them sitting on the same bench where we used to talk for hours. But this time, it was Tom beside her, leaning in close, his voice low, his expression serious. Sarah looked at him with that same uncertain expression, her hands clasped together in her lap, as if she was trying to make sense of something she didn't quite understand. And then, just as I was about to turn away, Tom reached out and took her hand. It was a small gesture, subtle, almost careful, but it was enough. For a moment, Sarah didn't pull away. She just sat there, staring at their joined hands, as if caught between two conflicting emotions. And then finally, she withdrew, shaking her head slightly, as if reminding herself that this wasn't supposed to happen. Tom said something I couldn't hear, and though Sarah still looked uncertain, she didn't seem angry. She didn't seem shocked, and that was all I needed to see. I turned away before they could notice me, my heart pounding, my mind racing through every interaction, every word, every warning sign I had ignored. It had all been leading to this, the slow, careful dismantling of our relationship, the quiet erosion of trust, the deliberate placement of doubt. Tom hadn't just been waiting for me to fail. He had been making sure that I did. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together, saw the way Tom had looked at her, saw the hesitation in Sarah's expression. I wanted to believe that she hadn't meant for this to happen, that she hadn't realized what he was doing, but the truth was harder to swallow. Whether she had meant to or not, she had let him in. She had listened to him, believed him, trusted his words more than she had trusted mine. And now, she was slipping away, and I didn't know if there was anything I could do to stop it. The next day, I made my decision. I needed answers. I needed to hear it from Sarah herself. I waited until I knew she would be alone, and then I called her. The phone rang longer than usual before she finally picked up, her voice quiet, hesitant. "Hey," she said, as if unsure of how she was supposed to talk to me now. "Can we meet?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "I just need to understand." There was a pause, long enough that I thought she might refuse. But then, finally, she sighed. "Okay." We met at the lake, the place that had once felt like ours, but now felt like unfamiliar ground. She was already there when I arrived, sitting on the edge of the dock, staring out at the water. She looked up as I approached, and for a moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or regret. I sat beside her, leaving a space between us that hadn't always been there. "I just need to know," I said finally. "What happened? What changed?" She was quiet for a long time before she spoke. "It wasn't sudden," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It felt that way to you, I know. But for me, it was slow. I started seeing things differently. I started feeling unsure." Her words felt like a knife twisting in my chest. "Did Tom say something to you?" I asked carefully. She hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. "He helped me see things more clearly," she admitted. The words burned, not just because they confirmed what I had suspected, but because she genuinely believed them. Tom had won. He had done exactly what he had set out to do, and she had let him. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. "Sarah, do you really think I didn't care about you? That I didn't listen?" She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a moment I thought I saw doubt in her eyes. But then, just as quickly, she shook her head. "I don't know anymore," she whispered, and with that, I knew it was over. I stood up slowly, feeling like the ground beneath me was crumbling. "If you ever remember how things really were," I said quietly, "I'll be here." She didn't respond. She just stared at the water, lost in her own thoughts. I walked away, feeling emptier than I ever had before. But as much as I had lost, I wasn't ready to let Tom win. Not yet. I needed Sarah to see the truth, and I wasn't going to walk away until she did. Here is the final part of the story, written with the same immersive and detailed style, ensuring a logical and compelling conclusion. In the days that followed, I drifted between anger, determination, and exhaustion. The weight of what had happened sat heavily on my chest, making every breath feel like an effort. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to make Sarah see the truth. But I knew that wouldn't work. She had already made up her mind. At least she thought she had. And as much as it hurt, I knew pushing her would only make her dig in deeper. I had lost her, at least for now, but that didn't mean I was going to let Tom win. I started paying attention in a way I hadn't before. I watched him closely, listened to the way he spoke, the way he carried himself, the way he maneuvered conversations. It was all calculated. I could see it now, the way he subtly controlled the narrative, the way he placed himself in the role of the understanding friend, the one who just wanted what was best. But underneath it, I saw something else. I saw the satisfaction in his eyes when Sarah looked to him instead of me. I saw the way his words always carried just the right amount of doubt, just enough to plant a seed without making it obvious. And more than anything, I saw the smirk he thought I wouldn't notice, the quiet triumph in the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. He thought he had won. He thought I was out of the picture. And that's where he made his mistake. I wasn't going to fight him the way he expected. He had built his entire strategy around making me look like the bad guy, impulsive, emotional, possessive. If I stormed in, accusing him, demanding answers, all I would do was prove him right. Umber. If I wanted Sarah to see the truth, she had to come to the conclusion herself. She had to look at him and realize what he had done, without me forcing the idea into her head. And so, I waited. I let them play out their little game. I watched from a distance, keeping my emotions in check, letting Tom believe he had completely dismantled me. He thrived on control, on knowing he had manipulated the situation just right. And that meant he had a weakness, his own arrogance. The first crack appeared a week later. I had gone to the cafe, the same one where I had seen them together, and taken a seat near the back, pretending to read while I listened. Tom and Sarah were at their usual spot, and as always, he was doing what he did best. "He never really understood you," Tom was saying, his voice low and smooth. "You always had to explain yourself, always had to justify how you felt. I don't know how you put up with it for so long." Sarah shifted in her seat, stirring her coffee absently. "It wasn't like that," she murmured, but her voice lacked conviction. Tom leaned forward slightly. "Wasn't it? You told me yourself. He never really listened. I mean, he cared, sure, but caring isn't the same as understanding, is it?" For the first time, I saw hesitation in Sarah's expression, a small, fleeting flicker of doubt. Tom saw it too, but he misread it. Instead of easing back, letting the thought settle, he pushed. "You deserve someone who really sees you, Sarah. Someone who gets it without you having to explain." And then he reached for her hand. I watched as Sarah looked down at their hands, just like she had in the park. But this time, she pulled away immediately, her brows furrowing. "Tom." His expression remained composed, but I saw the flicker of tension in his jaw. "What?" he asked, feigning innocence. Sarah shook her head, frowning. I don't know." Tom leaned back, forcing a casual laugh. "Hey, I'm just saying what I see. You don't have to agree." But the damage had already been done. For the first time, Sarah was questioning him. I knew it wasn't enough, not yet. But it was a start. Over the next few days, I saw it happening more and more. Tom had spent so long carefully chipping away at Sarah's trust in me that he had forgotten something important. When you take something apart, you have to make sure it doesn't collapse on top of you. He had been so focused on turning Sarah against me that he hadn't realized how much control he was taking for himself. And now, she was starting to notice. The little things that had once been comforting now seemed intrusive. The way he was always there when she was upset, always knew exactly what to say, always had an opinion on how she should feel. It was no longer reassuring. It was suffocating. I saw it in the way she started answering his messages later and later, in the way she seemed distracted when they talked, her eyes distant, her thoughts elsewhere, and most importantly, in the way she finally started looking at me, not with resentment, but with something closer to uncertainty. The final breaking point came on a cold evening, just as autumn began to settle in. I had gone to the park again, not expecting to see them, but there they were, sitting on the same bench, their conversation tense. "You don't have to think about him anymore," Tom was saying, his voice sharper than usual. "You made your decision, Sarah. You don't owe him anything." Sarah frowned. "It's not about owing him." "Then what is it?" Tom pressed. "He had his chance. He didn't appreciate you. Stop." Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. Tom blinked, caught off guard. Sarah exhaled, running a hand through her hair. "You keep saying that he didn't appreciate me, that he didn't understand me. But that's not fair. He did care. He did listen, and maybe we had problems, but..." She shook her head. "You weren't there, Tom. Not really. You don't know what it was like between us." Tom's jaw tightened. "I just wanted to help." Sarah studied him for a long moment, and then finally, she asked the question I had been waiting for. "Did you?" she said quietly. "Or did you just want me to doubt him?" For the first time, Tom didn't have an answer. Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Sarah looked down, exhaling shakily. And when she looked up again, her eyes found mine. I hadn't planned to be seen. I had been standing off to the side, unnoticed. But now she saw me, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she really saw me. I held her gaze, saying nothing, just waiting. Sarah turned back to Tom, her expression unreadable. "I need to think," she said. Tom opened his mouth to respond, but for once, no words came. Sarah stood up, hesitating for only a moment before she walked away. Not toward me, not toward Tom, just away, and I let her go. Because this time, she wasn't walking away from me. She was walking toward the truth. Days passed before Sarah reached out. When she did, it wasn't with an apology or a declaration. It was just a simple message. "Can we talk?" I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if we could fix what had been broken, if we could rebuild something from the wreckage Tom had left behind. But for the first time in a long time, I felt hope, because Sarah had finally seen the truth. And now, she had a choice. This time, it would be hers alone.